Welcome to Module 5. Hope that everybody's enjoying class, doing well. Don't forget that if you do have questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to text me, email me, call me. I'm glad to answer those at any time. This module we're going to be doing a couple different things. So there'll be some content in this video, so stay tuned, don't take off. And there'll be some content for today's lectures. So you'll find under the course content section of the module a couple pieces on age-appropriate presentation and expectations for spiritual development. They're just sort of one-page text, really easy to follow. It's a pretty good resource, so check those out, and it'll just spark a couple, maybe some questions or some ideas for you, sort of get you thinking in that age-appropriate sort of way. Okay, and then right now we'll be talking a little bit about a holistic approach to curriculum and about teaching doctrine a little bit. And then there's two other content pages, one about teaching on relationships with authority and one about teaching on relationships with others, that are notes from Amberlyn Salas, who's a friend of mine from Alabama. She's a youth, her and her husband are the youth secretary there, and so she has some good information in there, so you want to check those out. And then we'll close out content for this week, just talking about a couple things in this video. Don't forget your assignments continue. I know you guys just submitted your format for the Doug Fields book, Your First 2 Years in Youth Ministry, and your grades are there. Everything up to this point is graded, so what you see is what you get when you look at your grade. Okay, but next module we'll be doing the format review for the other book, Moving Forward by Looking Back. So be reading that so you're not sort of caught with just a week to read. And then also you'll need to read for this module, you'll need to be reading pages 125 through 219 in the Art of Youth Work, and you'll be needing to do that for discussion 3, where you'll need to post an original on Tuesday, I believe, and then on Saturday a reply. Please make it a point to post as early in the week as you can. If you can get it up on Tuesday, it's the best thing, because it gives everybody time to be able to do a reply. The last couple discussions we've had, there's four of you in the class, 5 with me, but there's 4 of you in the class, and it's tough if only half the class is posting the discussion. So if you guys could all, get to posting, that would probably help your peers as well as help your grades. So don't forget to do that. Okay, and then of course the course content quiz for this module will be available here as well, so get to it. So we're going to sort of switch gears from a little bit of an introduction into just a couple points. Not going to take too much of your time today, but just a couple points about developing sort of a holistic approach to curriculum. Okay, and then we'll talk about a couple other pieces in there. But when we think about, I use the term curriculum because I'm in academics, and I think it fits for what we're doing. But when you look at your year and you look at what you're teaching on a regular basis, I think it's important for us to be very intentional. And I like to use that word intentional because I don't think we do things intentionally very often. But we need to think ahead, look at that whole year, create a scope, a sequence for the things that we want to teach over the year. And I think that helps us approach curriculum, approach our teaching, that spiritual investment, whether it be preaching or teaching or in a small group setting like we learned reading the Art of Youth Work for the last assignment. But whether it be any one of those, I think we need to be intentional about the lessons that we're sharing and the content we're developing over the year. Now, if we just teach about the things that we become passionate about in various moments, so suddenly maybe there's a political thing that happens and you feel like, oh, I need to teach about that to address that. If we're always teaching sort of in that vein, when something pops up, we teach about it. Or, I get to church and it's a Wednesday and I got to teach that day. Well, what am I going to teach today? Well, that doesn't sound like a great way to be working your curriculum over the course of a year, just to kind of be What should I talk about tonight? What should I talk about tonight? I don't think that's the way to do it. I think if we look at the entire year and if we plan a little bit better, it gives us an opportunity to teach more holistically. We can cover more bases. We can cover more aspects. Okay, if we just teach on the things that we become passionate about at a various moment of inspiration, we're not really ensuring that we're covering all aspects of being a Christian that we should be communicating to our students. And so we want to make sure we're looking at the big picture and we have a big idea for the year. And we can hammer those things out month by month, okay? If we create a scope and a sequence for the year, or even 3 years, then we can ensure that we're connecting the spiritual lessons that we are teaching to our vision and mission for our youth ministry. So that goes back to our personal philosophy of youth ministry. What are the outcomes that I want to see in my students? What's the perfect student at the end of my youth ministry? Well, what sort of things do I need to invest in them through teaching over the next couple of years? Well, when you think about that, then it sets up, these are the topics I need to talk about over the next little bit. Excuse me. And there's quite a few topics. This isn't to say that we can't teach the lessons that we are inspired in maybe a moment of inspiration somewhere during the course of the year. There's always opportunities for us to maybe put a pause on what we're doing so that we can teach something maybe that's affecting our youth ministry currently that would be very important for us to bring up. So say if there's an outbreak of cholera in your youth ministry, then maybe it would be a good idea to address that at some point. Or if suddenly there's a lot of lying, or if there's bullying, and that'd be something that you'd want to address right away. Well, you can put the brakes on stuff, but it's important. I think it's better for us if we start with a big idea and change when needed, as opposed to just not thinking at all about the entire year or our curriculum in a holistic way and just kind of punching at it 1 week at a time. Well, then nothing's really connecting over the long haul. And I think it's important for us to begin developing a holistic approach to our curriculum and really thinking through what we are teaching over the course of a year or more. Okay. Another thing that I really like, and I think that helps us be a little bit more holistic and effective in teaching, and it's really caught on the last few years, and it's not something, it originated in churches elsewhere or whatever, but I really think teaching in series is a much more holistic and a much more effective way to utilize the lessons that we teach, okay, instead of just standalone sort of lessons. And I think it does a couple things for us. Okay, so this may be something you want to know for the content quiz. All right, I think it helps us develop one big thought. Okay, so maybe you're teaching in a month, sort of month-to-month basis. What's my theme? What's my series for this month? And instead of just developing that thought one time in a week, you're developing that thought multiple times over a month. 4 times if you're teaching on Wednesdays, and maybe even 8 times if you're taking your Wednesdays and your Sundays and you're directing them at the same topic. Okay, well then there's no competing ideas during that month. So instead of saying, what did you learn about this week, you're saying, what did you learn about this month? And that really expands the opportunity to develop one big thought. And you can come at it from different aspects and different lessons, but I think that helps with retention. Okay, and then I think it also, number 2, so 1, developing a big thought, and then number 2, develops an idea for students to rally around. So when you're just teaching one, random sporadic thing each week, your kids aren't really warming up to it. They're really not acclimatizing themselves to it. They're not really catching hold of it. But if week after week after week after week, you're teaching about, that same main big idea, that big thought in different ways, those students are coming each Wednesday knowing what's going to happen, and they're already geared towards hearing, so what are we going to talk about this week in terms of relationships? Or what are we going to talk about this week? We've been talking about the attributes of God. We've talked about this, we've talked about this, we've talked about this. I wonder what we're going to talk about this week in terms of, what's God like? And I think that gives students something to rally around. It also gives them something to talk to their friends about. So instead of saying, hey, last week we talked about, romantic relationships, I have no idea what we're going to talk about this week, but last week was really cool. Instead, they can say, we're in this middle of this series, we're talking about relationships. I know maybe you had a breakup recently with what's her name, the prom queen. Well, come check out our series about relationships and learn how you can get over that. Well, that gives them an idea an opportunity maybe to rally and evangelize around that theme for that month. And it gives you sort of a space to be teaching about those things and motivating people to come instead of, week after week you're changing a different thing. The third thing I think that teaching this series does is it helps us just with our time. It's less prep time for media, for visuals, maybe for theme videos, for those sort of things. Instead of just, every week I got to find a new tidbit, a new media tool, or I got to come up with a new graphic for this or that. I think that does away with that. Where you're planning those things a little bit further in advance, and it gets you away from that last minute sort of prep. And I think that does that for us spiritually, and it does that for us as far as content as well. When we teach in series, we know that series coming up. Instead of showing up on Wednesday, what am I going to teach tonight? We're looking at the month, saying I'm teaching about being honest, and we're hitting on A, B, C, and D. Okay, well, that helps us think in that vein all week long, all month long, so that content is continually stirring in us. And I think that helps us spiritually, so we know what we're praying for. And then I also think it helps us with content, so we know where we're going and what we need to be researching. And a fourth thing, and by no means the last thing, but the last one I'm going to cover today, fourth thing that it does, I think you can see how it improves information retention for our students, where they're marinating on one topic all month long instead of marinating on a couple different things for just a couple minutes. We're really driving that point home, and it's really hitting our kids hard, and it's easier for them to retain. So I think it helps to do those things. Helps develop one big thought, develops an idea for students to rally around. It's less prep or more focused prep, and then it improves information retention. So I think all those things are important. There's probably tons of other things that we could talk about as far as pros to teaching in a series. But the point here today is we need to be holistic in our approach to curriculum. Okay? So I want you to think about three major categories when you're planning your teaching calendar for the year or for multiple years. Okay, I think there's really three major three major categories, and then there's a fourth that you could probably just say is miscellaneous, because I know there's probably some things that we want to talk about that may not fit in these categories, but most things will. Okay, and I think those three things are doctrine, relationships with authority, and relationships with others. Okay, so those seem sort of broad, and they could probably be termed a little bit differently. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about doctrine right now, and then you can hit up Amber Lynn's notes on relationships with authorities and relationship with others. So when we talk about doctrine, and I'm going to recap those categories real quick before we talk about doctrine, but when we talk about doctrine, we're talking about things in terms of theology, who is God. We're talking about things in terms of salvation. So, that plan of salvation. We're talking about, the Holy Spirit. We're talking about what baptism is, all those sorts of things. Then we're also talking about lifestyle, okay, holiness, and those sort of things. So theology, salvation, lifestyle, holiness. That's what we're talking about when we say doctrine, and there's probably a better term for it. But it's those spiritual truths, okay, that we want to convey to our students. And another category is relationships with authority. This is where you're talking, whether it's in a lesson or in a series, this is where you're talking about students' relationships with God, the ultimate authority. Okay, this is a great place for you to talk about students' relationship with pastor, their local shepherd, the authority of their spiritual life. And this is a fantastic place for you to talk about people's relationships with parents. So you're talking about your students and how they need to relate to their parents and what their parents are in their lives. And those are some great opportunities for us to really help our students create a framework for how they live their life in terms of those three sort of relationships. And then third category is our relationship with others. All right, and this is where you talk about friendships, where you talk about romantic relationships, where you talk about how young people act, or when you talk about lying, if that has to do with our relationships with others. When you talk about honesty, when you talk about being a good steward of your time and your money, that has to do with our relationship with maybe our bosses, or maybe our how we spend our money. What does that have to do with the people that are around us, and how does that influence them? Different things like that. And really those things might fall into a miscellaneous category. But, what are we teaching them as far as spiritual investment? What are we teaching them about relationships with authorities? What are we teaching them about relationship with others? And what are those other things that you think are valuable for your students to know? If you're not thinking through those things intentionally, you're going to hit and miss those things, and you're not going to have a holistic curriculum. Okay, so it's important for us to think through. These are all the things that we think are important. How can we get to them in a year, or how can we get to them in 2 years or 3 years? Maybe you have a different scope, different sequence. Okay, and then when you come back around the next year, a lot of those same things are going to be important to you, but maybe you come at them from a different angle. All right, so I think that's important. Those are some major categories. We need to make sure we're hitting those over the course of a year or more, and investing that information and that content in our students. I think it's valuable because if we're just hit and miss, then we're never going to see vision fulfilled. If we're just planning hit and miss, then we're really not making sure that we're teaching the things that are going to get our students to become that outcome that we envisioned in our philosophy. And we may miss something and somewhere in there. If you cut doctrine out, if you don't teach enough about our spiritual formation, then in that spiritual investment, you don't talk about salvation one time during the year, that's in a sort of a systematic way, then I think you're in trouble. Obviously, well, if you don't talk about relationships with your pastor, I think you're missing out too. Someone in their format review this last go around, mentioned that the ultimate, I think it was actually Sharia when she was talking in her personal philosophy of youth ministry. Her ultimate goal was one of her ultimate goals was to transition young people from the youth ministry to the bigger, larger church. Well, if you don't ever talk about pastor one time, if you don't ever teach about relationships, what a pastor is there for and how we can connect with him or her, then we're not really giving our students an excellent transition to the big church. They're going to be like, who's this dude? So I think those things are all important. We talk about relationships with others, obviously friendships, romantic relationships, and so many other pieces in there. They're all critical important to a young person's growth spiritually. So we're going to switch gears, and I'm going to briefly talk to you a little bit about teaching on doctrine. Okay, why is it important? What does it do? Those sort of things. And Amber Lynn's going to sort of do some of that in her notes as well. I'm on the other two pieces. When you talk about why is it important? Why should I value teaching those spiritual investments? We're talking about theology. We're talking about holiness lifestyle. We're talking about salvation and other things. But why are those things important? Okay, I think it does a couple things for us. I think it establishes the value of a deeper understanding of God, His Spirit, salvation experience, and the impact of a Christian life. I think by teaching about those things, and maybe by setting a month aside, and you're teaching those things for 4 weeks, that tells your students, that tells your young people that theological understanding and the understanding of the Godhead and understanding of salvation, understanding of the divine sort of nature of Scripture, that those things are valuable. They're so valuable. I'm taking a whole month to talk about them. That transmits that understanding that what we're discussing today is valuable. I'm taking the time to systematically go through this because it's important. Okay, so I think that's one thing. It establishes a value of a deeper understanding of God, where it's not just sort of that surface sort of the cliche stuff we say in church, but we're taking really our understanding of God and we're really breaking it down, because it's important that we don't just have a surface understanding of God, but we have a deeper understanding of God. And I think we establish that value when we teach on those spiritual things. Number two, I think it provides an opportunity to systematically cover doctrinal and theological principles. When else are they going to get, hey, let's break this down, A, B, C, and D. Let's look at them systematically instead of just, we pull a piece out of here or a piece out of here. Maybe your, pastor will teach on a Bible passage in a Sunday night, but it really doesn't go into incredible depth about a couple different pieces, Well, this gives you that opportunity to kind of hit all those things and really systematically go through it at a little bit slower pace, so there's better retention. And number three, I think it provides an appropriate opportunity for students to ask questions. A lot of times young people have questions about their faith and about God, about what it means to be a Christian. And a lot of times they're afraid to ask those things. And maybe if they ask at home, maybe mom and dad are not equipped to answer them, or they just give them because I said so answer. So this gives us that opportunity where students can raise a hand and be like, hey, I got this question. How many gods are there? And you can be like, well, there's one, and I'll tell you why there's one. Okay? It gives you that opportunity, gives them that opportunity to ask questions for you to correct any incorrect understandings that students may have. It also helps to move students from this is what my parents and my church believe to the this is what I believe. It gives them an opportunity to really make those things real for themselves when you're systematically breaking it down and they're understanding those spiritual truths. Okay, so I think that's pretty critical. We want to get them from not just well, I do this because I'm religious, or I do this because it's my church tells me, or I do it because my parents tell me, but it gets them to the point where they're starting to understand why they believe what they believe, and I think that's critical. And then number four, you're making a spiritual investment that will reap rewards in the future. This one's pretty obvious, but you can't expect spiritual things to come out of students if you're not investing spiritual things in them. Okay, and this does a couple things for us. It'll help you raise up some great godly students, and if you're investing in them spiritual truths, doctrine, theology, those things don't leave them. So say they do walk away from God at some point in their lives. Here's an opportunity for them to have something inside of them when that moment comes where they realize they need God or whatever in the future where all of those things come back up. If we never talk about spiritual things, if we're always talking about relationships and friendships, if we're always talking about some sort of trendy new this or that, and we're really not ministering and really investing spiritually, then there's nothing for them to grab onto in the future when they need it. So I think investing spiritual truths, doctrine, things like that in students is very critical. And then 5, which is the last thing we're going to talk about today, but I think it's important for us to do this because you're giving them spiritual strength to lean on when they're tempted, when they're pressured by peers. If we're not investing in them spiritual truths, biblical truths, theological truths, salvific truths, if we're not investing those things, when there is temptation that comes their way, when they are pressured by peers, or when they are questioning their faith, if we haven't laid enough groundwork, then they don't have anything to lean on. And they're going to fall to that temptation, they're going to fall to that pressure, and they're going to fall to anyone that can give them a better reason than you ever gave them to follow God. So I encourage you, don't back away. Don't back away from teaching spiritual truths, doctrinal truths, theological truths, salvific truths, holiness truths. Don't back away from doing that. Because if we do, we fail our students. A youth ministry can be not unlike the YMCA or some other social club. We do a lot of fun things. We teach a lot of good principles. But ministry is in the message. And if we aren't sharing the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, there's no ministry that takes place. No message, no ministry. So while you can teach your students to be good people don't go to heaven. People that experience the salvific power of Jesus Christ, those are people that go to heaven. No message of Christ, no ministry takes place. I'd rather be more than a social club. I really want to minister to the students and young people that are in our care. So I encourage you. We're going to talk about mainly this week about curriculum. So talked about doctrine, about truths, spiritual truths. Check out the next 2 text pieces on relationships with authority and relationships with others. And look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions, comments, concerns. Love you all. Have a good night. Enjoy the week. And good luck.